Your doctor told you to keep walking. Your physical therapist told you to keep walking too. So you kept walking and your hip kept getting worse. That is not coincidence. You probably know exactly what this feels like. You try to be active because that is healthy and good for you, and everyone tells you that. But then you feel worse and you hurt after. So naturally you start wondering if you are the problem, if you're doing it wrong. Maybe you're not walking enough, maybe you're too weak, maybe you need to push through more. Oh, I hate that. Maybe you're getting old. Maybe you're just deconditioned. But after more than 20 years treating women with chronic hip pain, I started noticing something really interesting. The women who stayed stuck the longest were often the women following the walking advice. And the problem is not that the walking advice is wrong. Staying active advice is not wrong either. The problem is that when walking hurts, walking more is not the solution, because walking is not automatically therapeutic for hip pain. In this video, I'm going to share with you what doctors and physical therapists often miss when they tell you to walk more, and what needs to happen first before walking can actually feel smooth and normal again. All right, let's talk about this. Joints act different than muscles. A sore muscle often improves by just gradually working through some of the discomfort, but an irritated joint is different. An irritated joint reacts to overload, and when the load exceeds what the joint can currently tolerate, the inflammation response often shows up later. This is why so many women feel okay during the walk, but worse later that day, or worse the next morning. And this is one of the biggest mistakes women make with chronic hip pain. They only judge the activity based on how they felt during the walk, not how the joint responded after the walk. That delayed pain response matters a lot. If your hip aches more after a few hours after walking, if you feel stiff after sitting, if the first 10 or 20 steps feel painful after resting, your body is giving you some information. That's not weakness or failure or necessary damage. It's just information. The problem is that most women were taught to ignore these signals, or they just don't know how to interpret them. Before we keep going, if this is making sense to you and you want to learn more how to reduce pain during walking, hit subscribe. I talk about the most common things that are often missed when treating hip pain and how women can get their mobility back again. When the hip pain shows up in walking, either right from the start, getting better after it loosens up, or it feels okay at first and then suddenly shows up during the walk, women are often told that's just normal aging, or just keep moving, push through. Motion is lotion. And while movement really is important, there is a huge difference between movement that helps recovery and movement that keeps irritating already overloaded joints. And this is where dosage becomes everything. Let me explain this. Two women can do the exact same walk and get completely different outcomes. One feels better, the other one flares up for 2 days. Why is this? Because the starting point of the joint was different before the walk even began. This is why some days your walk feels okay, and other days the same exact walk destroys your hip. That's not a random thing. Your joint already had a different baseline going into the activity. See, some days your hip is already kind of beaten up after a busy day at work, or your deep hip rotators are already extremely tight because you have to sit down a lot, pushing the femur forward, making it feel worse during the walk. So before you walk, here are a few questions I want you to start asking yourself. When you first stood up this morning, did the stiffness last longer than 15 or 20 minutes? Do you already feel ache or pinching in the groin or buttock pain before activity even started? Did your last long walk make you more sore later the day or the next morning? If you answered yes to 2 of those, your joint is already irritated before you start loading it. And that means your current walking dose may simply be too much right now. This does not mean that you should stop walking altogether. This does not mean that your hip cannot tolerate walking. It means your joint currently needs a different loading strategy. That might mean shorter walks, shorter steps, slower walks, better pelvic alignment, better hip positioning, a proper release work before you even go for a walk. Breaking activity into smaller pieces, more frequent movement instead of one long walk, without forgetting to warm up the body for the demand. And this is where most women finally break the cycle. Because instead of constantly bouncing between overdoing it and to the full rest, they finally learn how to work with the joint instead of against it. Now, let's talk about rest for a second, because this part gets misunderstood a lot. So rest is not bad, but rest is not the solution either. Resting can calm the irritation down, but resting does not fix the reason the irritation keeps happening. This is why I hear so many women go through the same cycle over and over again. So their head flares, they try to rest, then the pain is better, then they go back to their normal activity and the hip flares again. And then they think, my body is just not healing. But the truth is, rest was never even the solution to the root problem. It was only supposed to calm the irritation down temporarily. And once you understand that, the cycle suddenly makes sense. Rest can actually work, but only with corrective movements to restore the alignment and balance in the body. Resting alone will only create more adverse effects like muscle and bone weakness, poor movement tolerance, and increased stiffness. Without forgetting the negative impact to the mental health. Our body is meant to move. Healthy body and mind really depends on movement. Now here is probably the most important thing I teach women with chronic hip pain. The night or morning after your activity tells you more than the activity itself. And this is huge because your hip often responds like a sunburn. You don't always feel the damage while you're doing the activity. You feel it later. That delayed response is the clue. So here is what I want you to start doing tonight. Before bed, just kind of rate your hip symptoms from 1 to 10. Think about the stiffness, the achiness, pinchiness, groin pain, buttock ache, whatever your pattern is. Then in the morning, before you even stand up, rate it again. If the hip feels the same or better, your activity yesterday was probably within your current tolerance. If the hip feels worse, the joint was overloaded. Not really permanently damaged, but just overloaded. And when women start tracking this consistently, everything changes. Because now you stop guessing, you finally have feedback. You finally understand what your hip can currently tolerate. And that is how you slowly rebuild walking tolerance without constantly re-irritating the joint. Here is what I want you to know. Remember when I say that walking is not the solution, but walking while working on correcting the root issue is. The walking advice was never really completely wrong. It was just missing the most important part. Your walking can only improve when you correct the issue that causes your hip hurt while or after walking. Once you center the femur in the socket correctly, you build proper pelvis alignment, and you get muscles working well, you can improve gait mechanics. That's when walking starts feeling less irritating, it's smoother, it's more natural. That is when walking distances can increase without your body backfiring every time. Once you understand that, you stop blaming yourself for not getting better. If this video helped you to understand your hip pain differently, make sure to subscribe because I talk about this every single week. And in the next video, I'm gonna show you why stretching is often keeping your hip pain going instead of fixing it.